Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Good Governance Academy webinar. It's really lovely having everybody on board, and it's our second one in collaboration with the B20 South Africa. And we're very excited to have the next episode talking about the next matter that the B20 is going to provide guidance on for the G20 that's happening in November. This event is available to you not only live streamed to YouTube, but also after the event, you can find the recording on the event page. And we also will have summaries and frequently asked questions available for you on the event page. We have opened up the chat function. And if you're new to the Good Governance Academy webinars, everybody puts in the chat function where they're from, because we operate in 167 countries now around the world. So please let us know where you're from in the chat function. And we also have available the reactions. And have I seen anybody on the chat? Nobody on the chat yet. There we go. Thank you, Nicola, from Gauteng in South Africa. So let's see where everyone is from. Namibia, lovely. Canada, welcome. It's very early there. Zimbabwe, Pretoria, USA. Thank you so much for joining us, Switzerland. I also have available the reactions button. The reactions is if you like what's being said, please feed us feedback, tell us, clap, give us a high five, say thanks very much by using your reactions. Really lovely to get your feedback, because otherwise we're kind of talking to ourselves. Talking about feedback, we also have the chat function open. So please, you're welcome to tell us a little bit more about yourselves in the chat function. If you want to share any related information, please do it there. And if you want to make any comments, please comment in the chat function. We generally have in our webinars going on a communication community sitting in the chat function. But if you want to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A, because there's so much chat going on in the chat. So please, if you want to ask a question, just use the Q&A function. And if we get too many questions that are in the Q&A function, I just ask you to please up arrow it so that we take those that are the most important, that people feel are the most important to be asked. But I'm going into our time now, and I'd like to introduce all of our speakers today. We have the Deputy Chair of the B20. It's the Task Force on Integrity and Compliance here today. And we have Ashley, who is the Deputy Chair. We have Yilmaz and Caroline, who are the co-chairs of this task force. But first of all, what we're talking about today is about from pledges to proof, basically making sure that these pledges are realized when it comes to sustainability, and that we do see the results that we're wanting to see and achieve the outcomes that we're wanting to achieve. But I'm not going to say much more. I'm going to actually ask the Deputy Chair, Ashley, to please provide us with an overview of what this is all about and the topics at hand. Thanks, Ashley. Over to you.
Firstly, let me start by saying thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here virtually and to share with you some of the work that has been done by the B20 Integrity and Compliance Task Force. And I'm so pleased to have two co-chairs joining today to give you some further information in terms of what we've been up to and some of the thinking around the work that's been done. And it's been an absolute pleasure to work with the task force and the co-chairs over the past few months. So if I can start off by just touching on a few points that I'd like to touch on. So firstly, focusing on integrity risks in growing climate finance systems, looking at examples from Africa and global markets on integrating ethics in funding pipelines and procurement. Also looking at insights on building trustworthy systems in emerging economies. So if we start firstly by looking at integrity risks in growing climate finance systems, one of the B20 Integrity and Compliance Task Force policy paper recommendations focuses on strengthening integrity and anti-corruption embedment in climate and sustainability finance systems. The policy paper outlines several integrity risks associated with growing climate finance systems. And a few examples that are covered within the paper are financial mismanagement and misappropriation, sustainability-linked corruption, and then, of course, transparency issues. So the influx of climate finance into regions with weakened oversight and accountability highlights some of these concerns related to financial mismanagement and corruption. This will include elements such as bribery, misappropriation, embezzlement, and fraud, which could divert funds from their intended purposes. There is a pressing need for more robust control environments in countries where capacity for oversight and accountability may be weakened, to foster a culture of accountability, transparency, and integrity. And taking these elements into account, I think, is almost at the core of what I'm going to be sharing with you today. So if we move on and look at sustainability-linked corruption, and just in terms of what that refers to, it refers to corruption and other financial crimes and governance failures that harm the environment and hinder global efforts in order to combat climate change. It can drive organized crime in multi-million-dollar industries such as illicit deforestation, mining, and then, of course, we see significant movements in terms of wildlife trade. These activities can undermine all the global efforts that are going into help combat these environmental impacts that many countries and communities are facing. Last but not least, transparency in the financial flow of climate financing and the timely exchange of information across borders in this heightening importance, given the fact that if we look at the amount of finance that's already going into these initiatives, it's already significant, to the point where if we look at the climate finance from the World Bank project portfolio, had $41 billion unaccounted for from 2017 to 2023. And this is, of course, significant. I thought what I could do is just quote a slight snippet from the Oxfam International Report, which states that there's no clear public record showing where the money went, how it was used, which makes any assessment of the impacts impossible. So it remains unclear whether these funds were spent on climate-related initiatives intended to help these low and middle income countries in order to protect people from the impacts of climate crisis and invest in clean energy. End quote. So as you can see from the report, that there is this uncertainty in terms of, is the funding that is being made available to protect communities being used appropriately? So we can see that addressing these transparency gaps is important for effective management of climate finance. In the Integrity and Compliance Policy Paper, the B20 recommends some solutions to G20 to help tackle some of these risks. Firstly, the public sector can enhance transparency by implementing a global climate finance transparency register. It can also develop climate finance red flag index in order to trace funds flowing for early risk detection for governance, environmental, and as well as financial integrity issues. On the other hand, by establishing internal controls and ethical standards, the private sector can help prevent financial mismanagement. And the private sector can also promote the adoption of international sustainability reporting, sustainability assurance, sustainability ethics, and independent standards within local jurisdictions and territories, so that it is embedded in as many territories and jurisdictions as possible. As I've already mentioned, these are just a few of the integrity risks that have been identified in the policy paper. If I now touch on some examples from an African and global market perspective on leveraging ethics in funding pipelines and procurement, if we focus firstly on Africa, so the Development Bank of Southern Africa initiated the Climate Finance Facility, or the CFF, in order to increase climate-related investments in Southern Africa. And it addresses market constraints, plays a catalytic role through a blended finance approach. So the CFF focuses on infrastructure projects that mitigate or adapt to climate changing conditions. So using this capital to fill market gaps and crowding private investment for targeting sustainability projects that are potentially viable, but cannot currently attract the market rate of capital at scale without this form of credit enhancement. And it will focus on infrastructure projects that mitigate or adapt to extreme weather impacts. So it provides this bridging element to make it far more viable for these projects to move forward. Organizations can also encourage to leverage existing sustainability due diligence standards that promote integrity, particularly when it comes to climate finance. If we look at some screening processes are enhanced by incorporating sustainability criteria, ensuring that there's alignment with recognized sustainability goals and standards. I believe if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So monitoring and evaluations are strengthened by using consistent and reliable sustainability data, which enables organizations to track progress as well as identify areas of improvement. So the adoption of global standards and the use of integrated reporting practices ensure that sustainability is embedded throughout the organization's governance and decision-making process. Globally, we've seen the European Union's Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which requires financial market participants to disclose their sustainability risks, their impacts, as well as their product classifications under various standardized categories. This impact of having this is that it increases transparency and comparability when it comes to sustainability labeled investment products. It allows for market correction, with several funds being reclassifying themselves in order to meet Article 9 criteria in terms of your dark green criteria. It enhances investor trust as well as regulatory confidence through clear definitions as well as required disclosures. So these are just two examples that have been outlined within the paper itself. They also illustrate efforts to integrate ethics and transparency into funding pipelines and procurement processes. And the aim of these examples is to enhance accountability and thereby look to prevent corruption. Thirdly, I'd like to touch on a few insights on building trustworthy systems in emerging economies. Collective action is a collaborative, multi-stakeholder approach that brings together governments, organizations, civil society in order to combat corruption more effectively than having isolated efforts done by these different groups. And it's done by fostering cooperation. It levels the playing field and strengthens the credibility and supports vulnerable market actors. And this ability to collaborate in order to drive a shared goal and a shared purpose is really at the heart of collective action. The responsible use of digital tools, such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, e-governance platforms, can enhance transparency, accountability, and oversight by enabling more real-time tracking of public spending, automating compliance monitoring, and of course, detecting irregularities, my apologies, in vast data sets in order to identify if there are elements that need further investigation. It is critical that these technologies are adopted within robust frameworks that prioritize transparency, explainability, fairness, and accountability in order to ensure that we prevent the amplification of existing biases, or, of course, unfortunately, creating new vulnerabilities and biases. By embedding these principles and promoting inclusive digital governance systems, emerging economies can build resilience and trustworthy institutions that support sustainable development and global cooperation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashley. So much food for thought there. One of the things that we spoke about in the Good Governance Academy recently, in fact, let me just put that link in here, was using AI technologies. And in this case, it was monitoring and auditing the city of Burbank, where Hollywood is, but really good examples there to actually use technology to build accountability and transparency. So that was really insightful, and we just hope that the G20 takes this guidance. There's a question about when the policy paper can become available, or if it's published, etc. Are you able to answer that, or should I?
Yeah. Yes, I can. Thank you. So on the 4th of September, we will be having a policy paper handover process with the B20 Secretariat. At the point where it is handed over to the presidency will then allow the papers to become available. So we anticipate probably by just after the 4th of September, they should become available and be published on the B20 website for people to have a look at. And I strongly encourage, in case we run out of time, to please look at the paper. Please do engage with us, because we will have further advocacy opportunities where we'd love to get thoughts in terms of the suggestions and recommendations that have been incorporated into the policy paper.
Thanks, Ashley. So we will also bring that link onto the event page so that people can come back to this event page and link through. So that's 4th of September. We'll keep that in our diaries. Thank you. It's going to be a great event, and I think this is a strong recommendation that needs to come through to governments. And talking about transparency and having information, I think that's really a topic that I'd like to ask Caroline to speak about, having the audit and accountability background and assurance background that she does bring. So Caroline really comes in the east of South Africa, should I say. I'm just going to make sure that you have the spotlight. Can you just tell us a little bit about turning data into accountability, because that's really what we're talking about here.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks to the Good Governance Academy for hosting this webinar. I'd like to just start by following on from what Ashley covered and touching on the risk of greenwashing. So greenwashing is the practice of misrepresenting sustainability-related information, practices, and features throughout the investment value chain. And in today's environment with climate change, extreme weather, geopolitical and economic uncertainty, social inequality, and rising disinformation, business has an important role to play by promoting ethical leadership and building trust between public and private institutions, and in these institutions by civil society. So the starting point is really that there is a need for accountability, because information that is being presented could well be misrepresented. When it comes to the public sector, there's a need for promoting public procurement practices that are ethical, responsible, and sustainable in accordance with national policies and priorities. And there's existing transparency mechanisms that focus primarily on national level climate action reporting, and these do not address project level integrity, due diligence, or verification of sustainability claims required to prevent misallocation and to foster higher integrity outcomes through climate finance and procurement systems. So sustainability focused integrity, due diligence, instruments and sustainability reporting and assurance standards are needed in order to close that gap and enhance transparency. Just touching on climate finance, the IOSCO Sustainable Bonds Report that was issued in May 2025 actually reported that there was a total issuance of US 1.1 trillion of sustainable bonds. And this is a 5% increase from 2025. And the expectation is that the market will continue to grow rapidly. And the cumulative amount of sustainable bonds issued stands at more than US 6 trillion. So the prediction is there'll be continued growth in the years to come. So these are large numbers, similar to what Ashley mentioned earlier. And with timelines getting compressed and the number of companies and governments seeking to achieve certain sustainable goals by 2030, the risk of greenwashing would, as a result, grow exponentially because issuers, for example, could be misleading investors about the criteria used to designate or label a product as supporting sustainability objectives. As a result, it is important that we do have standards in place. So the adoption of mandatory global bond standards, along with sustainability disclosure, assurance, and ethics standards, will increase accountability and reliability, enhance investor protection, and reduce opportunities for greenwashing and other unethical behavior. Now, let me go on to standard setting. So I used to be on the board of the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants for 6 years, and the IASBA for short establishes global ethics and independence standards, and its sister board, the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, or IAASB for short, establishes global auditing and assurance standards. In addition to these two boards, there's also the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, or IPSASB, that develops public sector financial reporting standards and sustainability reporting standards for use by governments and other public sector entities throughout the world. And last but not least, we have the International Accounting Standards Board, or IASB, and the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB. And these develop financial reporting and sustainability related financial disclosure standards. And they apply principles of transparency, full and fair consultation, and accountability as they undertake their standard setting process. So mandatory international standards are critical to consistency and comparability of information that jurisdictional and international investors and other stakeholders rely on to make investments and other decisions. Now, international accounting standards have been around for over 2 decades and have been adopted in many jurisdictions across the world. International standards on auditing and international independence standards have also been around for the same length of time, if not longer. And these standards have constantly been enhanced to be responsive to the public interest as it relates to financial information that's put out in the public domain and the independence of auditors that audit those financial statements. The ISSB, for example, on the other hand, was only established in November 2021 to deliver a global baseline of sustainability-related financial disclosures for capital markets. And so international sustainability disclosure standards are not as well entrenched as international accounting standards. And the level of assurance over sustainability-related financial disclosure and the qualification of sustainability assurance practitioners vary. And as a result, this presents opportunities for companies or organizations to cherry pick the most favorable voluntary standard to apply when providing sustainability-related information to the capital market. And then, as a result, this then creates opportunity for greenwashing. In the case of sustainability standards, there has, as a result, been unprecedented cooperation and collaboration between different standard setting bodies to identify and align common disclosures so that the alphabet soup of voluntary initiatives is replaced by an effective, efficient reporting landscape. For example, the TCFD recommendations, SASB standards, and CDSB materials were consolidated and incorporated into the ISSB's standard. Another example is the close collaboration and cooperation between the IASB and the ISSB to ensure connections between IFRS accounting standards and IFRS sustainability disclosure standards. Yet another example of collaboration is between the IFRS Foundation and Global Reporting Institute, or GRI, to provide a seamless, global, and comprehensive sustainability reporting system for companies looking to meet the information needs of both investors and a broad range of stakeholders. So that's on the sustainability reporting standards side. And now if I go on to the assurance side and the independence and ethics side, another example of cooperation is that between the IAASB and ISBA to ensure connections between the International Standards on Sustainability Assurance, or ISA, and the International Ethics Standards for Sustainability Assurance, including International Independence Standards, or IESA, and also between the IAASB and ISBA with the ISSB to ensure that sustainability-related financial disclosures are well supported by assurance and ethics standards. All three legs of the stool must be in place for transparent, consistent, timely, reliable, sustainability-related information that investors and other stakeholders can confidently use. In 2023, IOSCO endorsed the ISSB's standards, IFRS S1 and IFRS S2, and called on its 130 member jurisdictions to consider how they can incorporate these standards into their respective regulatory frameworks to deliver consistency and comparability of sustainability-related disclosures worldwide. IFRS S1 sets out disclosure requirements for companies to communicate to investors about sustainability-related risks and opportunities that they face over short, medium, and long term. And IFRS 2 sets out specific climate-related disclosures and is designed to be used with IFRS S1. In 2024, IOSCO also endorsed the IAASB-approved ISA 5000 on general requirements for sustainability assurance engagements and the ISBA-approved IESA and other revisions to the ISBA code to enhance trust and transparency in sustainability reporting and assurance, to establish clear expectations for ethical behaviors, and provide more specific requirements for practitioners and organizations in relation to ethical sustainability information preparation and independent assurance engagements on sustainability information. So the SSA 5000 is designed to apply to sustainability information reported across any sustainability topic and prepared under multiple frameworks and for use by both professional accountants and non-accountant sustainability assurance practitioners. In the case of the IESA, it addresses critical risks to integrity, quality, and effectiveness of sustainability reporting and assurance. And these risks include the risk of bias, conflict of interest, pressure to act unethically, fraud, including greenwashing, non-compliance with laws and regulations by those who report on sustainability information or who provide assurance on sustainability information, and threats to independence of the sustainability assurance practitioner. So these standards would be the go-to standards for professional accountants and non-accountant sustainability assurance practitioners. These standards will come into effect for periods beginning for sustainability assurance engagements for periods beginning on or after December 15, 2026. And the reason for the urgency is really because of the proliferation of requirements around reporting. In the case of public sector sustainability reporting, I mentioned the IPSASB earlier on. So the IPSASB is using the global baseline of IFRS S2 in order to develop sustainability reporting standards on climate-related disclosures for public sector entities for their own operations, as well as for public sector entities that are responsible for the outcomes of climate-related public policy programs. So this initiative will not only strengthen public finance, financial management, but will also help mobilize sustainable investment and promote accountability in the public sector. So if global baselines for mandatory disclosure standards, assurance standards, and ethics and independence standards are adopted in every jurisdiction and territory, then opportunities for greenwashing and other unethical behavior are reduced. The standards are designed to be adopted by jurisdictions into national laws and regulations and to be used as the basis for national requirements, including provisions to allow for proportionate application, making them scalable, implementable, and enforceable. So is there any challenge in implementing this, and what's the solution? The challenge is that in emerging markets and small, medium, and micro enterprises, this whole plethora of standards seems to be unduly burdensome in terms of legal requirements and data requirements. And these entities and markets could also be facing capacity constraint in developing comprehensive sustainability reports, which may then result in non-compliance with the sustainability standards. So to prevent that mismanagement of information, governments should consider developing and implementing incentives that promote ethical behavior in organizations participating in public procurement for climate initiatives by rewarding organizations that demonstrate strong commitment to integrity, transparency, and compliance. So consistent reporting practices across both public and private sector will reduce regulatory fragmentation, will improve the quality of information available to investors, and enhance overall efficiency and effectiveness of the capital markets. And ultimately, adoption of these standards will contribute to a more resilient and inclusive growth trajectory aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and improve accountability. Carolyn, I've covered a lot. Back to you.
You have. Thank you, Caroline. Absolutely. That was a lot of information. I thought it was just us technologists that have so many acronyms, but it sounds like you do too. So thank you very much for that. I think I tried to keep up with all of your acronyms, and I've posted on the chat function all of those acronyms you were using. But when it comes to data, certainly it looks like in promoting what Ashley was saying, transparency and getting governments to start promoting transparency and disclosure and avoiding, the greenwashing is what you're saying, as not only at a government level, but also at a corporate level. And then, as you say, from there into public sector is incredibly important. So there is one question here in the Q&A from Ronald. Is Ronald saying, and we've heard a bit of this, but maybe you can just summarize for us, what is the status of third-party verification or certification in the sustainability space? Now, I know you've spoken about the ISSA 5000, but maybe you can give us an example from where you are and what you're seeing in terms of the uptake of the verification and kind of audit of the sustainability data.
Right. So the International Federation of Accountants, or IFAC, together with AICPA, which is the American Institute of Chartered CPAs,
Professional
accountants, they have been putting together a report over the past 5 years, and they've been tracking, what standards, which companies are actually putting out sustainability reports. Are those standalone sustainability reports, or are they integrated reports? And the shift is moving from standalone sustainability reports to integrated reporting. They've also, in the initial stages, looked at most of the parties that were providing the verification were not necessarily accountants. So in certain jurisdictions, the accountants were carrying out that work, but in other jurisdictions, it was the engineers who were carrying out that verification. So the standards that were being used was, a whole host of standards, and you had the TCFD standard, you had the SASB standards, and so with that convergence into the S1 and S2 standards, in future, we would expect that there'll be greater consistency in terms of parties that, so I talked about the standards, and then I also talked about the parties that were giving these assurance or verifications. On the standard that was being applied to carry out the verification work, it was, it could be ISO standards, or it could be the assurance standards that the IAASB had put out, but that assurance standard isn't really as robust. And so it really was more of a light touch standard, and independence of the party that was providing the verification was also a light touch. So with the changes that are coming on from December 2026, the assurance standards will be more robust, and the ethics and independence standards expected of sustainability assurance practitioners will also be more robust. And to set a level playing field, it doesn't matter whether you're accountant or a non-accountant, you should be, applying that same set of standards. And I think that's where we need the jurisdictions and the governments and regulators to come in, because they need to implement this and adopt it as their local jurisdictional requirement.
This is a very important recommendation that's coming out of the B20 to the G20, and something that we really want them to consider deeply in terms of the adoption. And also the ISBO, the code of ethics that surrounds this data. I loved your comment about cherry picking the standard that makes you look the best. I think that's very insightful. I haven't heard of that before. But data and transparency, there's so much data, and just the number of data points that organizations have to manage this is not spreadsheet stuff anymore. So it's not just the data points and the need for transparency and the reporting itself and the assurance of it, but it's the systems that underpin all of this now, because it's technology that's going to enable us. So I'd like to hand over to Yilmaz now, just to give us some insight in terms of sustainability related technologies that we're seeing emerging, and how those can be used to underpin and create this trustworthy, transparent environment.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be on this panel, which is a very important topic. It's focusing on a very important topic. First thing I would like to say is that trust is the essence of good governance and foundation of sustainable development and improving quality of life. And all of these systems, data, standards are extremely important, and they are developing nicely over a period of time. However, the first thing we need to internalize is the understanding of why trust matters to all organizations. It matters for the sustainability of the organization, sustainability of the society, and sustainability of the planet. Because lack of trust increases transaction costs. And as we are all trying to utilize the resources most effectively, anything dissipated through these transaction costs is actually taking away from our quality of life and our ability to build a better future. So trust is extremely important that we need to develop. And some of the recommendations that are made by my colleagues, Ashley and Caroline, are very, very important. For example, the integrated reporting, I think, gives a much better sense of looking at the company or the organization and how it creates value while protecting the interests of all of its stakeholders and what kind of a future outlook it has. This was initially become a B20 recommendation a decade ago when my company, Arge Consulting, was a knowledge partner on governance and sustainability under the Turkish leadership of G20. So it has been a decade, and we are still integrated reporting is not a requirement. It is a nice thing to do. Lots of companies are adapting it. We are moving nicely, but we have to move faster. So regulations are very important. Standards are very important. As Caroline has mentioned, there are numerous standards that are coming up, but particularly ISSP is becoming a regulation. And when a standard becomes a regulation, it becomes a much more widely utilized. Currently, about over 40 countries adapted ISSP as a regulation, which means that that will become the standard that everybody needs to apply to avoid cherry picking, as Caroline has mentioned. And it is very important that the foundation of ISSP, IFRS, is trying to put the linkages between all the other standards like the GRI and the others to make sure that this standard, which is becoming the norm, will be all-encompassing. Okay. First thing I would like to say is that our sustainability reporting focuses on sustainability performance. Sustainability performance is difficult to benchmark across industries, companies, and geographies for two simple reasons. One of them, sustainability performance, is context specific. Okay, and it is multidimensional. So it is difficult to compare things which are multidimensional and context specific. In a drought area, saving some water might be very, very important. In other areas, saving twice as much may not be as important. It depends on the company's size, use technology, and so forth. One of the pieces of work that Agri Governance Academy does, and I would appreciate, Carolyn, if you could show the Sustainability Governance Scorecard book, is that trying to look at not the sustainability performance, but how we are approaching our sustainability efforts. So it's trying to measure governance of sustainability, which basically eliminates the context specificity and multidimensionality, thereby helping improve peer learning from different industries, different countries, and so forth. This particular report focuses on 7 stock exchanges and covers about 200 global sustainability leaders as defined by having made it to the sustainability indices of these 7 stock exchanges, and looks at not their performance, but rather how they are doing it Are they reporting on their goals? Are they reviewing it through their boards? Are they publishing their board skill matrix? Do their boards have people who understand sustainability and various other things like this? And thereby, it is becoming a very important tool to help peer learning from many different industries, many different geographies. Okay. The other thing I would like to make sure we note is that, yes, standards and regulations are extremely important. Yet, we have to internalize the understanding of sustainability. And from an economist perspective, basically, sustainability means internalizing the externalities into our decision-making, all kinds of externalities. The fact that it doesn't pose us any cost doesn't mean that it doesn't pose any cost on others, either our stakeholders or the planet or whatever. And if we do not consider it properly in our decision-making systems, then sustainable world or a climate change will be hurting significantly. So this is one of the reasons why I think we should be focusing on behavioral economics as well, and making sure that the leaders of the organizations adapt this understanding. And one of the ways of adapting and demonstrating that they have adapted it is by having self-declaration of what they are doing with respect to integrity, ethics, and their sustainability in a public manner, perhaps as part of their chairman's or president's report in their integrated report or in their sustainability report. This is extremely important because when the leader takes on this responsibility to publicly commit, it means that their internal systems become aligned with this goal, the resources are allocated properly, and they become liable for anything that is failing in their organization. So they pay attention to these matters a lot more. So it's very, very important to do this, as well as reporting the performance according to various standards and so forth. So this kind of a behavioral economics approach is as important as the data itself. This is not to say that I'm not focusing on data, the proper publication of data, but data is not enough either. As you know, we have to have comparable data. We have to make sure that it becomes information through analysis and through benchmarking and comparison. Make sure that it becomes knowledge through the results of those analyses. And even further, it becomes wisdom to adapt this understanding of internalizing the externalities that we are creating to the world. So this is extremely important to make sure that we have an all-encompassing understanding of sustainability, and reporting is a major part of this. Now let me get to some of the technological issues and how we can improve. Obviously, understanding is one thing, but if we don't have the feedback mechanisms, feedback systems shortened, it is easier to have greenwashing and so forth. So we have to reduce the feedback mechanism, okay? Understanding when there's a problem and so forth. This means that we need to report. We need to report our results. We need to understand how we are doing, learn from others, but we need to report. And particularly with respect to climate change, there is significant room for improvement in terms of climate finance. So one of the recommendations of B20 South Africa is, as you know, having a finance transparency registry, which is very, very important. Because some of the things that will come out of this, if we can manage to do it properly, is that it will enhance transparency and accountability, which increases trust, which is critical. We will be able to address the climate finance gaps, because right now, international, national, and private sector finance routes or the amounts are not being collected in a place where we can analyze them properly. So we don't know the gaps that well. It's difficult to get this data. It will be helpful in terms of combating corruption and mismanagement, because if things are recorded, it is easier to identify the issues and so forth. It would facilitate inclusive and equitable climate action by identifying where the needy is not getting sufficient finances and so forth. We'll be able to identify these things as well. And obviously, it will drive the private sector engagement as well, this kind of issue. And we can leverage technologies such as blockchain to make it and to enable its benchmarking without going through the privacy issues and so forth, those types of things. And in short, it will help the global climate goals and reporting standards. If we have where the resources are coming, where they are going, if we have a common standard to follow this through a blockchain type of a registry, it would be very, very useful in terms of accountability and building trust as well. Another topic that I'd like to touch upon is the importance of having global standards and applying them on local areas as well. As you may know, I used to chair the UN Global Compact's national networks a while back, and it was very, very useful to have common standards across countries in terms of reporting, because then we can do the benchmark, we can speed up peer learning. Also, we can identify good examples, what works and what doesn't work, and easily deploy it globally in a more faster as well. That would be very useful for the climate change as well. And global standards helps companies with respect to their ability to trade and develop business globally as well in terms of their economic development too. So having global standards, applying them locally, and helping information sharing, good practice sharing across countries and across local different geographies and different industries is extremely important for the future of our world. So in a nutshell, first thing we need to focus on is the philosophy of sustainability. We need to make sure that each of our leaders commit to this integrity on this sustainability issue, report on that, both their commitment as well as their performance. Even if their performance fails in certain areas, if they are fair about explaining that, that's a very, very important thing for building trust. And as I mentioned, trust is the essence of sustainable development. And our standards are getting unified under the ISSB. If we push it too far, for example, just as the European EFRAG has done, they had to take a step back. So we have to make sure that we can focus on the cost of applying these standards as well, because sometimes, especially the smaller SMEs and so forth, cannot. We have to be realistic. But if we have the right understanding, we'll have a better world. And systems will definitely help this. The common understanding of how we collect data is extremely important, but it is not enough. We need to analyze the data to make it information. We need to make sure that we can come up with policy recommendations to make it knowledge. And we need to make sure that that knowledge is disseminated globally to make it a wisdom. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I've got this isn't so much a question as I think
there
it's
was one more thing I forgot.
Sure.
In terms of building trust, one of the key things is stakeholder engagement. Okay, proper stakeholder engagement is extremely important to keep everybody in line and to be able to identify the deficiencies very quickly and so forth. We have developed a civil engagement model. Please show that book as well. That demonstrates 420 steps as to how to do good stakeholder engagement based on good governance principles.
Sorry, I'm trying to find it here. I'll share it. I'll share it afterwards. But thank you. I'll show that one as well.
It is very important to do it properly, to make sure that we inform our stakeholders about the constraints, about what we are trying to do, to make sure that they are on a common playground field in terms of their engagement. They understand the issues as well. All of them have access to same information. We need to make sure that we listen to them, and we need to make sure that we have to give feedback as to their needs and requests, because it is impossible to comply with all the requests. We need to
Yes.
explain whys and why nots to build trust. Because in the end, what we are trying to do is not trying to push a lot of data. What we
Yes,
are
we need
trying to
to
do
make sure it lands.
is not only comparing data. What we are trying to do is build trust and make sure that we regard the other as we regard ourselves. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. So this is Kerry was saying really, so it's a question, but I think it's a research paper that perhaps your consultancy would look at. Is Kerry was asking, are there any metrics on the cost of sustainability risks, trust verification? It's the cost of trust relative to global GDP and the trends. So there's the next project.
Good
thank
question.
you, Caroline, for sharing that. I'm not going to answer it now because we have run out of time, but I do want to circle back just a final point to Ashley, because Ashley, I think this brings it, just to bring it all back together again. The question is, given all of this, what would you say the greatest barrier to embedding anti-corruption in our climate finance strategy is? What is the one greatest barrier that we're facing?
Thank you so much. I think one of the greatest barriers is the absence of unified, transparent, and enforceable governance framework that are supported by strong oversight, harmonized standards, and effective capacity building, especially in jurisdictions where you have weaker institutions in place, because that unfortunately creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited for corrupt practices. So to overcome these, and I think Caroline and Dr. Yilmaz already touched on this, by leveraging and converging the international sustainability due diligence and reporting standards is one way in which we can help to overcome these barriers. We can, of course, continue to look at creating the global climate finance transparency register. We can invest in capacity building initiatives in order to strengthen oversight capabilities. But without robust, harmonized, and transparent governance frameworks and the underlying institutional strength to implement and enforce them, and Dr. Yilmaz and Caroline both touched on these, corruption will continue to threaten the effectiveness of climate finance strategies. So by addressing this requires coordinated international action. It requires capacity building and the adoption of global standards for transparency, due diligence, and assurance.
Absolutely. And it's what Prof. King always says, is that you can't legislate for honesty. And basically what he's saying is good behavior needs governance frameworks and not just the compliance frameworks. It needs both, but good governance framework certainly brings that. And it's what you were speaking about, Caroline, on the ISB side, the ethics side of things and the code of ethics. And also applying the ISSA, it's not just accountants that are required to, or the auditors are required to adhere to a code of ethics when they are auditing this information. But now you've got engineers and environmentalists all applying these standards. There has to be that ethical underpinning. And I think your point, Ashley, very well made, enforceable governance frameworks in these jurisdictions, not just compliance, but actually making sure that we've got these codes of conduct and governance codes that really bring the peer pressure through and not just legislation. But I know we've run out of time. There are other questions. Please, the web page will be available after the event with all of this information. But you did speak about the collaboration, stakeholder engagement, and moving towards transformation. And that's our third and final webinar that's taking place on the 23rd of September. So please, I did put the link there. Please join us for that as well. It is the final installment and really will bring the wrapper around these 3 webinars. And of course, the report coming out on the 4th of September, you'll be able to read it with the report, which will be fantastic. It's not just cold. But with that, I'd like to hand over over to Dudu Ndlovu, who is the head of advocacy for this task force. Dudu, can you just tell us what's coming next, please?
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you to our panelists, our deputy chair, as well as our co-chairs for such important insights on such an important topic. As Caroline has mentioned, the next seminar, the next webinar is coming up on the 23rd of September on another very important topic, and our chair will be here herself to deliver it on amplifying the collective action and integrity standards for inclusive growth. Her name is Rueda Redfern, and she is the CEO of Deloitte Africa. So please make sure you register and you listen to the third seminar. We've been very appreciative from the Good Governance Academy for the platform and really for allowing us to access the network. So make sure you register, and we look forward to seeing you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dudu. Thank you so much to the speakers. It's really, really insightful information you provided us today. There was so much to get into an hour, and I see one of the comments is, can we please have more than an hour? Well, actually, most people drop off after an hour because they can't afford the time, unfortunately. But the recording will be available on the event page along with the summaries. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you,
Thank you
colleagues.
so much. Thank you so much.
Great working with you.